I'm here to share with you the status and progress of strengthening national child protection systems in Eastern Africa. I am sure you'll agree with me that the previous presenters really brought pregnant issues. And for me, I'm going to tone it down and bring out exactly what has been happening in the 7 countries. This is just a summary because there's a lot of information based on what we have seen the last few months or years. A lot has been said about national child protection systems, including their key pillars and components. I need not to belabor this, but for the sake of reminding ourselves, I think it would be prudent for me to just brush through. And it is clear that coordination is one of the key pillars of a child protection system. And obviously, laws and policies are very fundamental. Going down, one clearly sees that these are the components. And I'm confident that if you talk about national child protection systems, sometimes it can be abstract. But when you unpack the pillars and the so-called components, then you are able to clearly see how do you implement each and every one. Because we've been having challenges and problems in implementing each and every component. So I'm going to highlight a few that we felt that they are so critical based on the on the implementation that we've had for the last 3 years. Now, after we unpacked these components, obviously, Wamboi has talked on the process that we have gone through. We've had several meetings, and we've been having technical working groups converge to discuss specifically on areas of implementation, including development of work plans. So those work plans were very clear, and they were based on different components of a national child protection system. But then, when countries go back, then there is need to align with what is happening in the country so that the work plans are in tandem with the action plans that are for our specific countries. So to ensure that we follow and critically analyze what each country implements, we embarked on a process of monitoring visits to countries to meet technical working group members, both state and non-state actors, to understand how system strengthening works. One of the strategy was to establish technical working groups. And as we gather here today, we are representatives of technical working groups in our respective countries. And what is this technical working group? This technical working group comprises of both state and non-state actors. So we are saying the ministries that are key. We are looking at the various departments within the government, that is the police, the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Education. So the key ministries who bear the burden in child protection, and also non-state actors who as well bear the burden in child protection. So these are the teams that we thought would really drive system strengthening in the countries. I know the question of driver has been so consistent, and we will continue being consistent in talking about the drivers in the process of implementing NCPS. So in countries where child protection works in harmony, we realize that there is a particular ministry in charge of child protection and systems approach to child protection. Clearly states that the work of child protection is the responsibility of the state. Sometimes we use state and government interchangeably, but if the state is taking the key role, it means that issues of coordination need to be very clear, issues of budgeting needs to be very clear, and obviously other issues that have been articulated in terms of human resource capacities are also fundamental. Then we are seeing other civil society organizations as other actors that play a complementary role. And when you see this mix, then definitely countries are making effort to ensure that the journey to NCPS is actualized. In this progress, we are seeing governments are making effort. They're making effort to actualize child protection system strengthening with support from a number of stakeholders key in child protection. We are seeing a number of challenges that the governments are facing. They are grappling with key issues, including allocating budgets because it's not adequate. So there's need to seek support from other key stakeholders. Then in our monitoring visits, we discovered that governments and civil society organizations have embarked on joint fundraising efforts, meaning that they are budgeting together for child protection issues in the 7 countries. And discussions are still ongoing to ensure that they allocate adequate funding. For example, in Uganda, the government is raising funds for the child protection strategy. In Kenya, the budget for orphans and vulnerable children cash transfer program has been allocated 8.5 billion this financial year. Then the efforts are still being scaled up, and the government is slowly picking that initiative from partners and tagging it within its key or mandate programs. And obviously, other countries are also making efforts towards that. There are quite a number of examples. According to the information provided by different countries of East Africa, an analysis from the project perspective shows that a lot of progress on system strengthening is evident in a number of countries where the state and civil society organizations have played a key role in child protection system strengthening. So the efforts are progressive moving forward, and one sees there is already a deliberate effort of governments to work and the civil society organizations to work together, that we need to appreciate that. There is sometimes collaboration with government and sometimes not. Why are we saying this? Is because this collaboration, I don't know how to put it, but sometimes it is good to be selfish, but what are the consequences of being selfish? I think all these are determined by a number of factors where the governments would kind of want to work alone without the involvement of civil society organizations, because civil society organizations can be a nuisance. So they would rather segregate them. Or sometimes the civil society organizations would want to work alone because they have a particular funding. If they are going to involve the government, then there are going to arise a number of questions. So when this happens, then somebody is suffering, then the child is suffering. So what we are saying is these collaborative efforts need to be deliberate, need to be planned, they need to be systematic. It is worth to note that government plays a lead role, and it is the driver in system strengthening work to ensure coordination at all levels, to ensure ownership and sustainability. Again, this is not new. It has been a song, year in, year out. But people would want to know why exactly are we not moving in the direction that is deemed productive. Now, one of the key components in strengthening national child protection systems is coordination efforts. This is where we are actually having a thorn in our flesh, and we are seeing quite a number of challenges. The first thing that I would point out is that government is spearheading some coordination mechanisms, especially commissioning studies that will help improve the situation of children in most of the 7 countries. So there is a lot that is happening. But why am I saying some? It means that coordination is allowed by different teams at some level, including government and CSOs. But what is not very clear is at what point are the teams converging to draw some commonalities to address issues holistically. Fine, the coordination mechanisms, one sees them at different levels, but they do not speak to each other. So what really can be done for them to speak to each other and move in tandem. So that has been a challenge. Then we are seeing the existence of a child protection working groups, both at national level and also at community level. And they are largely driven by civil society organizations. This depends on who have the resources. Then the government is left as a spectator, making it difficult to visualize if the government is the real driver in child protection system strengthening. Because sometimes when there are resources is when you see there is the agenda of system strengthening is embraced. But if resources are dwindling, especially from the civil society organizations, then you see less activity. So one definitely would want to see how, again, does the civil society organizations and the government work together so that they move, together step by step, so that you don't leave the government behind and the civil society organizations are also not left behind. The issue about resources is very key. In the effort to meet with countries to find out exactly what is happening in coordination, we realize that there is proliferation of child protection working groups dealing with different thematic areas. Like, for example, there is a working group dealing with children in emergencies, another one dealing with child labor, and so on and so forth. But the emergence of these child protection working groups fragments the system further. I am sure you'll agree with me. The opportunity, however, is to have sub-working groups work on thematic areas, then report to the larger child protection working groups responsible under the key ministries. There are those countries who have already made that attempt to have other sub-working groups. But now the government is taking the driver in spearheading these child protection working groups. One of the things that emerged that was also of interest is coordination of donors has been pointed as a challenge, because donors who deal with individual entities as long as it fits their interest, and this has been seen as the biggest impediment, as initiatives are not well harmonized, while in some areas priorities are misplaced. So if a donor decides that this is the trend and they redirect their resources towards this initiative, then it definitely means that there is a lot of coordination that is required at country level, and sometimes that doesn't happen. So those levels don't speak to each other. Then obviously there are no resources allocated for coordination, especially logistics and calling for meetings, unless this is supported by development partners. Whereas coordination has been a key issue, further analysis shows that coordination comes with hidden costs that most organizations, including government and CSOs, cannot meet in the long run, either because they are not considered in the budgets or resources are lacking. The logistics involved were not factored during planning, making it hard to sustain some processes. This has constrained the existing resources, making it hard to follow up on the issues. Again, this is an area where sometimes we find a bit of challenges. In the middle of the year, we realize that this is a very important issue to follow up on. But when you look at the cost, then you realize that this is something that you cannot really achieve because you did not factor in your budget. So that has hindered coordination in the long run. Now that as part of the component, there are quite a number of challenges as well, where if coordination is not well, planned, then it affects other components as well. Now the second component that I'm going to highlight are the issues emerging in laws and policies. Because for you to really move, you must have laws and policies that are implemented. And this is a point that has been emphasized. So again, I don't need to belabor, but the question right now is that the governments have progressive pieces of laws and legislation. Like in different countries, like in Uganda. I mean, in Rwanda, we have integrated child policy. We have children acts in all these countries, supported by partners. But the bigger question is, how is the implementation? Because the implementation is a challenge because there's lack of resources as well as lack of budgeting for children and political goodwill. There's a whole document that we did a review on the status of laws and policies in the 7 countries. And that report will be shared with you. A summary of that will be shared with you tomorrow to see what is emerging from different countries. You could clearly see countries like Rwanda. They are really on the forefront to make sure that these policies are implemented because of political goodwill. So this platform, therefore, will make us really learn from each other on how each country is moving forward in terms of implementation. Again, the third component, because we were trying to unpack what are these components really about. Human resource is one of the critical components. And again, a review was done that shows all these discrepancies in human resource. And that will be shared with you immediately after this. But a snapshot of what we found out is that there is shortage of human resources. Like, for example, in areas where human resources are key, whether they call them the social welfare officers or social workers or the children officers who coordinate child protection work in the local government or county or district. So that shortage is very evident, and there is need really to relook at how do we ensure that we have adequate and qualified human resources to ensure that the agenda of child protection is taken as it were. Recommendation given to have at least 4 social welfare officers or children officers at local level or at district level to address the challenge of shortage. So more is yet to be done. The capacities of these officers is also wanting, as they are fresh graduates, hence they need to reorientation and training. Again, one clearly sees that this is an area where we need to put enough effort that after recruiting a human resource, there is need to expose them at different levels so that they align they are aligned within the work as expected. Then we have seen government or departments undertaking various initiatives to address human resource capacities. Like, for example, in Kenya, there's an initiative that has been launched by the government called capacity rationalization that started with few counties. For example, like in Machakos, what they were doing in Machakos County. So what they were doing is to see how much time an officer would take vis-a-vis the workload. But the question is, are officers optimally being utilized? So there is need to maybe shift or to transfer to another department where the skills are really needed. So these efforts are also going on, not necessarily being called the same name, but you could see there are efforts to even train the human resource. This cannot go without mentioning national institutions. The national institutions are very key because as part of human resource, the national institutions need to have particular responsibility. And examples are many. Like in Uganda, there is the National Council for Children's Services that need to play a statutory role and be delinked from the Ministry of Gender, Labor, and Social Development as the situation stands at the moment, and have competent technical staff to address pertinent issues and strengthen coordination and hold government accountable. Because these two institutions, they have to be independent, and definitely they also fit into each other. So in terms of protocol, again, one sees there is a bit of confusion there. National Commission for Children, yes. And then, of course, working together with the Ministry of Gender, call it Mise Prof. So again, one sees the need for the two institutions to be working together and reorganize. What are the challenges? Now, in this process where we've been working together, over the years, technical working groups have set up, developed work plans, and it was seen important for these work plans to be implemented. But then, when we visited the countries, we saw the countries were kind of aligning their work plans with those of the country. So the issue of aligning work plans or with the costed plan of action or framework in other countries remains a challenge. And because the establishment of these structures within the government departments in charge of children affairs do not speak to each other, and relevant structures like the CSOs and other government departments, making it hard to assess implementation. So we are seeing that after we have converged here and go back to our countries, we see there is a disconnect with these particular plans that we have developed. So again, that requires us to sit down and reflect and see how are we aligning with the existing work plans. Then I will cite a number of examples in the countries that we visited, like the implementation of NCPS in Ethiopia have faced a myriad of challenges given the environment where the legislation on Societies and Proclamation Act is in full force that requires NGOs to refrain from dealing with child rights and child protection issues. This has been a debate in Ethiopia, and that has really barred civil society organizations from achieving their work in full. And I'm sure in this forum, we are going to continue with this discussion and see how best do we assist Ethiopia to overcome the challenges. Yet, the Civil Societies and Proclamation Act is in full force. In general, the issues remain fragmented because coordination by the government is still weak, and civil society organizations are still taking a lead role depending on who have the resources to push the agenda of the day. This has given rise to very many coordination mechanisms that are not aligned, affecting the realization of NCPS. So again, one sees fragmentation because every time we are supporting the government and we are seeing weak coordination, and we are seeing very many coordination mechanisms. So how do we get out of that quagmire? Then it is also worth mentioning that the international agency working closely with the government less likely consult with each other, with other stakeholders in the field of child protection to recognize the work that has already been done, fragmenting the systems further and promoting duplication efforts. Like, for example, studies that have been conducted, they are very good. And from these studies, recommendations are very key. But for you to do other studies, to complement the ones that have already been done, there is need to consult the other references. So in most cases, from those visits, it came out clearly that there is no consultation. So a review is done, another one is done, then one sees similarities and also confusion in these studies. In conclusion, we are saying that the key ministry dealing with children within the government has the mandate to be the driver in system strengthening to influence the rest of the actors. Because the rest of the actors are also playing complementary role. But we will continue being consistent in saying the driver. But the key ministry has really to be equipped with requisite tools for them to move in a direction that is deemed fit. Then the roles of different actors must be distinct, clear, to have a strong system, both at national and community level. When actors converge and their roles are not very clear, they will end up not moving in the right direction. But if their roles are very clear, then one will even give them more responsibility. One would clearly see how ownership, is emerging, moving forward. Then lastly, weak coordination affects systemic approach to child protection. And as a key component, other components are highly affected. You can see how these other components are very clearly spelled out. But if the aspect of coordination is very clear, then how do we even achieve regulations and standards? Where a lot of guidelines are going to be developed, a lot of standards are going to be developed, but if they don't speak to each other, then how do we really achieve that particular component? So with that, I would like to mention that these visits that we did, our engagement with the different countries have revealed a lot. And you can see from the country's perspective, there is already good effort to ensure that NCPS is moving towards the right direction. But then, how do we handle the challenges that we face in our effort to ensure that NCPS is realized? So I'm upbeat that this particular platform is going to help us to see what are the strategies that we can employ so that we move NCPS to the next level. Thank you very much.
Okay, one of the things that I would like to comment on that is that when state parties make their reports, the reports are considered, and then the committee gives some follow-up and concluding observations, whereby they follow up to see what is happening on the ground. And I would also want to add that apart from the state party report, when the country submits its report, we also have the CSO reports that are complementary to check whether what the country is saying is actually what is on the ground. And for most of the countries, they are working together. That is the state party and the CSOs. They are working together. And we can say there has been progress in most of the countries. And I don't know whether Abigail would add something.
What is the position of the committee in relation to national child protection system? So far in the committee session that I have attended where state parties submitted their report, I witnessed that the committee has a concern on national child protection systems, and each state party that comes before the committee is requested on what measure it has taken with regard to strengthening its national child protection system. And whenever the committee believes that there is a gap within the country, it will put it in its concluding observation, identifying the measures that the country should take, including budgetary allocation, and also taking out children institutions out of another ministries. For example, in many countries, children departments are found within Ministry of Women or Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. So the committee will recommend for the states to address children issues with a different, within a specific or a different institution. It also recommends to make specific and a clear budgetary allocation. So I can say the committee has interest in proposing to state parties to take all the necessary measures to come up with a strong national child protection system.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Cornell, for the presentation. Of course, this is what is happening on the ground. Thanks for capturing all that. And I would like to contribute on basically there is under human resource and financing issues. Maybe I would say from Uganda there is we are progressing as the technical working group. Of course, the challenge is financing. The resource allocation is really very small, and in most cases it depends on other key actors. So I was looking at the human resource bit, and You talked about the welfare, social workers and all that. From the experience, like in Uganda, they are called probation and welfare, but you realize the concentration is more or less on welfare, and the probation bit is normally missed out because that it has to go with a legal bit, legal presentation and all that. So basically, there's need, like the way you talked about it for skilling, providing those skills and the capacity building in that area. The National Council for Children, of course, all along it was being housed by the Minister of Gender's Labor and Social Development. Of course, it would be difficult sometimes to tamper with someone who is housing you in his compound. It's very tricky. But as a start, recently they shifted. They have their own premises. Maybe with time they will be able now to play their laws. This is a good starting point. Otherwise, when they are still being housed, they wouldn't, So that is very, 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 maybe very important. And another thing is on coordination. As maybe the government, as a driver, no doubt about it, they have to drive. To me, they have to drive because it's their mandate, the way you mentioned it. As they drive, the key ministry, looking at actors, actually there are also actors within government which need to be also well coordinated, especially when you look at different ministries, whether like in Uganda you move from health, education, justice, finance. Actually all children issues cut across. They don't belong to one ministry. So there's need also for coordination at that level. So that it's not all about coordinating like civil society organizations and all that. In Uganda, of course, there is an effort, but there's more need to bring all those actors, all different government departments and relevant ministries, to play their role, to know that actually they are entrusted by citizens to play that role. So thank you very much.